The statistics of violence this year in Northern Ireland are the lowest for a decade. Deaths, 72. Injuries, 472. Explosions, 297. Shootings, 622. In Ulster, that's an improvement. The familiar blanket man leads another demonstration in support of the IRA hunger strikers. 7 men have now gone 53 days without food. 2 are very near death. The organisers said 7,000 marched on this demonstration. The press estimated 5,000, but one organisation knew the real figure, the British Army. From a helicopter fitted with sophisticated television gear, the Army watched throughout the demonstration. But TV Eye has learnt that the IRA can now intercept these signals. They see what the Army sees, just part of an increasingly sophisticated conflict. One of the few journalists who's tried to find out what's going on is Frank Doherty of the Irish Press.
Both sides are particularly sophisticated, and indeed both sides are determined to keep that sophistication secret. And it's a particularly secretive area of the conflict, and one that not only do they not like to talk about, but they get terribly annoyed when anybody else talks about it.
An army pig on the streets of Belfast, the open face of conflict. To look behind the shutters, we made approaches to both sides. Neither would help. But is the IRA making advances of its own against the army?
They've moved from the day of the petrol bomb, which was basically a bottle filled with a bit of petrol and a few jelly babies and some rags and a match, to the time where you can open a door in a darkened room and have an explosion. In that any light falling upon the detonation source of the bomb will completely destroy the whole house or building that you happen to be in. So, and also, they can now set off bombs from long distance.
The Warren Point bombs and others like them use the same technology as hundreds of model plane enthusiasts all over Britain and Ireland. The Army even knows the make of equipment they're using and has had some success in using their own electronics to detonate bombs still in IRA hands. But the IRA now places 2 or more radio-controlled systems on their bombs, and provided they can see their targets, as they could at Warren Point, distance is no object. The first bomb was hidden in a parked lorry. 6 died. Then the bombers waited for Army reinforcements and detonated a second massive bomb in this gatepost. 12 more soldiers were killed. The Irish Army on patrol south of the border. First reports from Warren Point suggested that the bombs had been detonated from the south, and as a result, the Irish further upgraded their military preparedness. 10 years ago, there were no Irish Army detachments on the border. Now they have 2,000 men. And liaison between the Irish and British security forces is certain to have been strengthened at last week's talks in Dublin between Mrs. Thatcher and Mr. Haughey. So far, Irish troops have not been the target of the provisionals, but they know that that could change, and certainly the Gardaí, the Irish police, are already fully extended against the IRA. They searched for 48 hours around this newly erected machinery shed, and eventually discovered a specially built underground bunker. It contained what was described to us as an IRA doomsday dump. Old bolt-action rifles, far less sophisticated than the armor-lights now favoured by the IRA. Ammunition clips for their heavy machine guns, and a homemade mortar. Equipment to be dug up and used in the event of a broader conflict in Northern Ireland. And this is the bomb-making corner of this cache. Over there, igniter cord, an exploder, detonating fuse. These are simple watch timing devices for the cassette incendiaries that have been used widely in campaigns against shops in Northern Ireland. And this, the photoelectric cell, perhaps the most sophisticated item in this bomb haul. It's activated either at night when a torch is shone on it or in daytime when a cover is ripped away. There have been occasions, for instance, when British troops have removed a provocative IRA poster from a wall, only to activate a bomb. The urban conflict may have wound down, but here there is as big a British presence as ever. Bigger, perhaps, with the increasing deployment of undercover SAS units in the countryside. With the advent of the radio bomb, the army rarely uses the roads. It's a war of intensive surveillance. When TV Eye drew up to film this H-block poster, we were spotted from somewhere. Within 2 minutes, the first helicopter was overhead, taking a closer look at us. Then a Beaver spotter aircraft arrived on the scene. Suddenly we knew we were trespassing on a real guerrilla war, as the ex-army officer explains.
It's much more of a war, in the truest sense of the terms, a rural guerrilla warfare, which is fairly total, in that the other side deploy quite large forces and try and set up incidents which are quite involved. One can think again of Warren Point.
They're building a new base in Crossmaglen, with some difficulty. When a civilian contractor climbed this crane for the first time a few weeks ago, he was shot and wounded. The shot was fired from somewhere in the town. No one will ever know by whom. For this is Republican Crossmaglen, the most troublesome corner of a troublesome province. At least 40 British soldiers have died around Crossmaglen in the last 10 years, some in this main square. Saracens, the most heavily armoured vehicle in use in Northern Ireland, are clad with anti-rocket wire, and their commanders use the swivel turrets to guard against sniper fire. Right in the middle of town, the army is harnessing the highest technology to defend itself against the IRA. Outside their corrugated iron fortress, seismic sensors of the type developed by the Americans in Vietnam are almost certainly in use to detect intruders. Direction-finding aerials enable the army to pinpoint walkie-talkie communications, even the activation of radio bombs. There's remote-controlled closed-circuit television. There's Clarabelle, the anti-sniper device, apparently more effective on static locations than on Land Rovers. Then there are infrared floodlights that illuminate Crossmaglen Square at night, or they do if you happen to be on the right side. When British troops first appeared on the streets of Northern Ireland, they came as protectors. One of the problems in Crossmaglen seems to be that the people don't particularly want to be protected. In the bar he runs off the main square, one of the town's leading citizens, Paddy Short, describes the situation.
The presence here is, well, nobody wants them present here, and I don't think they're making any impression at all on the people.
How did the local community react when British troops first came onto the streets of Crossmaglen?
When they came first, in 1970, they were, they were tolerated rather than accepted. And they had a few drinks in the pubs, but then after a couple of months, they just separated completely. And now there's absolutely, I think the situation has got worse. There's absolutely no communication between the people and the army.
And when Crossmaglen had been supplied, there were more convoys of building material for Fork Hill, the neighbouring border outpost. The army is digging in South Armagh. RAF and Royal Navy helicopters drop troops on hilltops miles from the road to watch for hostile movement below. You're now looking at border country in the dark. It's the sort of view you'd get if you were a British soldier on the lookout for IRA movement. The army wouldn't show us any of their own equipment in use, but from ordinary civilian sources, we've acquired our own. Even in midwinter darkness with no moon, this light intensifier that we're using enables us both to see and to film. It does so by maximising what little light there is available from a few distant farmhouses and from the stars. But even that is not the end of the story. These are the latest generation of surveillance devices. Thermal imagers don't rely on light at all, but on heat. So a man standing in total darkness, or in camouflage for instance, shows up quite clearly on this imager. And it's not only against infiltrators that the army can use this sort of equipment. From the air, for instance, it can be used to detect recently turned ground, an arms dump maybe, or a bomb. More and more evidence of the IRA's sophistication in the electronics field has been produced in the Belfast courts. Telephone tapping is a commonplace, of course, on both sides. There have been recent cases here, though, involving homemade IRA bugging devices and radio receivers capable of monitoring almost all the Army's communications. And in a case here last June, the court was told that an IRA counterintelligence unit was using sophisticated electronic devices actually to decode Army messages. The IRA's technological capability has been confirmed by the Army itself. A report that got into IRA hands described them as professional, intelligent, experienced terrorists. The report argued that the provisionals would continue their campaign as long as the British remained in Ulster, and that they would step up their exploitation of modern technology.